The universe of Fallout is one with unsurvivable scenarios lurking at every corner in its irradiated wasteland. Wildlife abominations like Deathclaws and Cazadors, mutant beings like ghouls and super mutants, psychotic denizens, and radiation everywhere. But what about the bunkers advertised to be the last bastion from nuclear winter? What if you weren't an unlucky schmuck that was stuck above ground to be either vaporized by total atomic annihilation or be irreversibly charred and mutated? One of the lucky percentage of Americans that were invited into Vault-Tec's state-of-the-art Fallout shelters. I've covered the vaults of the Fallout universe in briefer detail before, but 5 years have passed, more vaults have popped up with more time to describe grim survival rates and how you will be axed. With the new Fallout television series revealing the exploits of Vault 33, I felt it appropriate to discuss the Walmart chain of human experimentation bomb shelters, your fate in the hands of those with no governmental interference or societal backlash. Escape for you being nigh impossible through impenetrable steel, and if you do, will only lead you to a radiation-filled wasteland that will kill you on sight. A terrifying notion with no true way out except facing the odds of whatever vault you are in. Let's see how you would do in the underground lottery as we discuss why you wouldn't survive most of Fallout's vaults. The world of Fallout before the nukes fell was one of many back-to-back scares and threats, sandwiched between the pandemic of the New Plague in 2053, the Euro-Middle Eastern War of the 2050s, and the utter collapse of the United Nations. The United States entered a national state of paranoia. The US government would set in motion Project Safehouse in 2054 to establish and maintain massive underground bomb shelters in the eventuality of another international catastrophe due to staggering costs in the hundreds of billions of dollars, governmental corruption, and international conspiracies. Only 122 vaults were created across the greater United States. Vault-Tec was established in Los Angeles to create these Fallout shelters. Unbeknownst to the public, these vaults were secretly taken over by a cabal of powerful people across all US organizations that would later be called the Enclave, ranging from top scientists to military leaders to politicians and more. The Enclave concluded that the world would indeed be plunged into nuclear war and began to create the plans for a multi-generational starship. Yeah, that's right. All so that these brilliant minds and their offspring could leave a radiation-filled Earth to go and colonize amongst the stars, faraway planets, and to save their own asses. There was no plan to save the world or rebuild it. To gauge various scenarios, the Enclave oversaw construction of the vaults. Dubbing it the Vault Behavioral Project, 105 out of the created 122 vaults would house different experiments, treating residents like guinea pigs against unique circumstances, pushing the human mind and body to hellacious heights. Chemicals and drugs in the air, social environments, radiation, forced societal hierarchies and traditions, psychological manipulation, extreme solitude, extreme rationing, and more. The Enclave monitored each and every one of these vaults from a remote oil rig, hoping to learn and solve from these people any technical, provisional, and residential societal issues to help them create their ideal starship in order to migrate an entire society for light years to a foreign planet. But, as fate would have it, the Enclave would ultimately be destroyed time and time again before they could move forward with any grand plans. Vaults would remain unmonitored from there on out while their residents were fully immersed in the inane, insane, or inhumane experiments thrust upon them. And you are now one of those vault dwellers. Only 0.1% of the US population is going in. If you're not a pre-selected individual chosen by American elites, you'll simply be radioactive dust or a mindless ghoul. If you're chosen to survive in the vaults and usher in a new age of America, which Yes, it's a requirement to be American. Sorry everyone else in the world, you're either just a commie or not important, but your chances of being a guinea pig as an American will be quite high. Now don't get me wrong, these vaults are human testing sites. Some of them went along as intended as a kind of comparative thing, much like any kind of animal testing or whatnot. Not every vault will be a horrific experiment. Control sites like Vaults 3, 8, 13, and 76 have amenities provided for long-term survival and don't have any really dubious plans outside of keeping their residents alive, not barring outside stimuli or internal systems or doors failing. Vaults like 76 will eventually leave the comfort of these safe havens to venture out into the wasteland to reclaim the land and then possibly die because who knows what's out there, as would be the case for Vault 3. Dwellers can remain indefinitely inside their chambers and never leave like the intended purpose of Vault 101. Vaults could open up and set up shop as a base of operations and commerce to trade with the surrounding wastes like Vault 81 or Vault 8 with Vault City. Control vaults would be outfitted with GEC devices that would allow for terraforming land nearby for ease of resettlement. But these are only a fraction of vaults, and most of them are going to be performing strange or straight effed up experiments on you. And due to nuclear fallout, you are going to be stuck long term in whatever fresh hell awaits you at the hands of the former Enclave's intent with Vault-Tec's equipment. Once you have entered the vaults, a litany of different scenarios will be set in motion. This experiment will either be immediately known, trickled down over time, or discreetly seeped in to change, mutate, or horribly disfigure you and those around you. You are more than likely to end up in much more dire circumstances that would put your survival into a definitive dead zone. So to get the ball finally rolling on the experimental vaults, let's see what you're getting into. Vault 3 is a bona fide safe haven for at least your lifetime. Everything goes according to plan for a little over a century. That is, until a simple water leak leads to the entire compound going without water, forcing them to open their doors to the outside world and attempt to procure more or get supplies to fix things up. For a short period of time, trade would go well until a drug-addled gang called the Fiends tricked and raided the vault, slaughtering every single person inside and turning the vault into a base of operations for gang activity. If you're one to be born into life within Vault 3, eventually, one day, a horde of coked up lunatics will come promising trade and instead delivering death. You will not stand a chance at fighting back against people on psychoactive drugs that are pretty much not feeling any damage. Stating this, one can see how even a control vault does not guarantee survival. Even then, this water leak could have easily happened much sooner and within your own lifetime. And if you don't have the knowledge or resources to fix a water leak within the advanced walls and architecture of the vault, you too could meet a similar fate against much worse conditions by leaving the vault and being attacked by whatever's outside. Vault 11 has inspiration from Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. All residents are informed that every year one vault dweller must be sacrificed, or else the computer would kill every single person inside via lethal gas. Each year, the vault would hold a general election to nominate an overseer after each sacrifice. This newly elected leader would carry on in their role of administration until the time would come when they would be forcefully sent to an execution chamber to die. Over time, different political parties would be established to nominate multiple people. Considering this meant you were the leader for a year before dying, you could see how things would get a bit sticky, especially in the case of corruption and propaganda that would see to opposition becoming sacrificial leaders. Some would assault women at the behest of threatening to nominate their husbands and nominating them anyways. One victim, Catherine Stone, would kill an entire block due to this transgression, giving her the nomination of sacrifice. But now that she was leader, she opted to dissolve the election process and chose to make it a randomized lottery instead. This would not last and it would not actually go through, as the former bloc would wage a violent rebellion leading to an all-out war that killed all but 5 dwellers in Vault 11. When it came down to these 5, each of them decided to not kill one another, only for the Vault's computer to celebrate in their faces, congratulating them. The notion of an offering or else everyone died was always fictitious. It was never meant to actually happen from the start. This was merely supposed to be a test to show how human spirit and teamwork would persevere, with the vault opening soon after this revelation. And with the people seeing that this was all for naught, they all ended up dying except for one person. Now, if you were part of this annual sacrifice, what would you do? We can all proclaim heroics and say how we would be, but when faced inside a tight bunker with the idea that someone must die each year, who's to say how you or those around you would act? With no way out of this bunker because it's nuclear war out there, what else could most people think? Even if you denied this blood sacrifice, those around you would be cold in fear and would go along with it. Would you be sacrificed, or would rebellion and or change of leadership cause a riot that killed many others? Now, Vault 12 is a very simple experimental setting. What if in the chaos of the nuclear outbreak, many people were just allowed to rush in and flood in outside of just the designated residence for the vault? But the trade-off? The door will not close all of the way, allowing nuclear radiation to just pour in the shelter. But if we are going to think about this realistically, this will not turn into a whole everyone becomes ghouls and then founds a necropolis city situation. No, everyone just slowly dies from radiation poisoning, you included, without any sanitary supplies or being forced to stay in one ventilated room. You'll eventually die of dehydration and or starvation. A long and miserable death will await you no matter how you are going to die, either via those options, as you are cramped in with a bunch of hysterical people all keeling over in kind, with just that cracked door at the front being the window of missed opportunity. Vault 15 was a test of diversity amongst all creeds. There would be no implementations of population control, and the Enclave even planned for things to go south, with so many different ideals clashing day to day, as they planned to not open the vault for 50 years. Overpopulation would quickly begin to swell in the first 20 years, while living conditions would grow worse. The conflict would lead to a premature opening of the vault, with nearly every single person leaving, with some stripping the vault of its most vital equipment upon leaving and founding different groups out in the wasteland, from raider tribes to relatively peaceful towns. Those that remained in the vault with its scraps would eventually be attacked and either killed or driven out. Similar to others, depending on who you join up with out in the wastes would determine how and if you would survive. The colony of Shady Sands would constantly be attacked by giant red scorpions and raiders, meaning death in the desert by those hands could be at hand. Joining with raider gangs would also mean deadly combat day to day. The Khans would routinely meet near extermination via other groups like Chosen Ones and Caesar's Legion. The Jackals resort to cannibalism to survive and are easy to dispatch via any organized efforts, being killed like rabid dogs pretty frequently. The Vipers would find themselves bowing to a religious zealot of a leader that believed he had found a path to God via a viper pit where he allowed giant mutated vipers to kill many of his own to prove his point. The Vipers would expand and overextend to the point that large chunks of their numbers would be exterminated by caravan companies and the Brotherhood of Steel. So, in the end, Vault 15 will have you up in odds with people with different ideals than yours, to apparently violent degrees as numbers grow and rations fade, only to force everyone out to choose one of 5 fates: staying in the vault to die to whoever finds the vault, or going to a town and fighting scorpions and raiders daily, being constantly wiped out in a gang, going in a gang and going cannibal mode and being put down left and right, or the final option, believing in a snake god and dying to giant snakes or a group of racist steel. Vault 17 has very little known about it, simply that things went fairly well for it and its dwellers for over 7 decades. That was until the super mutant army of the Master swooped in, slaughtering most of its residents and kidnapping the rest to convert them into more super mutants. You might think, okay, cool, I'll live a long life, and maybe I'll survive and get turned into a super mutant. Well, 2 things there. Most people lose their sense of self upon transformation. Your body basically becomes something else. Also, most super mutants under the flag of the Master's army were killed in the events of the first Fallout game, with some of them migrating outwards. So either you die in the vault to brutal knuckle-dragging brutes, or turn into them and mindlessly die. Vault 19 is a test of us versus them, Crips versus Bloods, Red versus Blue. Residents were immediately segregated into one of 2 groups, designating people either of blue or red affiliation. These groups were not allowed much contact between each other and even had their own overseers with representation. Discrete methods of mental manipulation were implemented by Vault-Tec. Subliminal sounds and messaging would slowly build up paranoia between both groups. Machinery and technology would randomly malfunction, with one side always blaming the other each time this occurred. Random people would be drugged, and again, opposite sides would blame doctors from the other. Inklings of espionage would be chalked up to hearing sounds and feeling drafts from the air vents, and even overhead lights would begin to flicker in very distinct patterns, making people wary and making them believe a secretive code was being sent out by the other side. All being conducted by the overseers. Everyone there would begin to experience violent psychosis until eventually tempers would rise a little too much as Red and Blue went all out, with everyone dying in the internalized skirmish of this civil war. Years and years of subliminal messaging with tons of people around you blaming one side of a claustrophobic vault would have just about anyone ready to rip the throats out of each other, even if both sides have not enacted any violent crimes prior. Even if you withstand the mass psychosis instilled in the vault, the ending war, where everyone else is starting to go violent, would have every living soul extinguished because we could just not get along. And we are also being manipulated the whole time. But if you do survive, in the very end, eventually a band of escaped convicts from a nearby prison will bust into this vault, brandishing explosives and slaughtering anyone that is left behind, and take up the vault as refuge. So even if you survive, you're gonna die to explosive nuts. Vault 22 is primarily composed of scientists looking to create crops capable of combating world hunger. Its green efforts would seek to using defense contractor fungal colonies, hoping to make a fungi that could eradicate pests but keep vegetation alive. Bavaria mordicana was implemented. When a creature inhales these spores, all internal organs will fail after 10 to 20 days, with the corpse spraying spores all around to infect others around. Scientists assumed it wouldn't affect people, but it did. And upon death, did the dead have their bodies hijacked and transformed into moss-covered spore carriers, ravenous humanoid beasts looking to rip people apart and spread the infection. Venus flytraps would also grow in size, with gaping maws to chomp down on people. The more the fungus grew and the higher the kill count, the more spores that would fill the air with the confines of the vault. Being fungal in nature, there would be no means of treatment except fire. So for you being locked in a vault, all you could do was watch in horror as every living thing came back to life to spew spores down your throat or gouge you open. There was no answer to escape and or do anything else except to ignite everyone in hellish fire. And if you can't do that, your consciousness will be conglomerated into the biomass of the sentient fungi. Vault 34 is Texas if it got California'd in a can. Being a vault with an extreme amount of guns and ammo, like stuff to the brim in its armory, the vault would prioritize recreational activities with swimming pools and more in place of more living spaces. While originally the dwellers were allowed unlimited access to these firearms, the Overseer predicted issues with every resident having guns. Locking the guns away, the Overseer would anger every single civilian as they proclaimed it went against their American rights. A mini revolt would be staged where some residents escaped the vault to inhabit Nellis Air Force Base to live their own free lives, while those that stayed behind were put on strict lockdown, having 24/7 security breathing down your neck, and eventually, due to overpopulation, the Overseer would then, after taking away your guns, would impose population control, saying you can't have sex. The overstepping of boundaries would cause a fight to regain control, especially to get your guns back. In the skirmish, did the life support systems of the vault become damaged, with contained radiation spewing inside? Because of the Overseer's panic to re-shut the vault from the previous escape, the door controls would be damaged enough to where everyone inside was stuck and could not get out, and would slowly start to succumb to radiation poisoning over a long period of time. In the end, guns would be reclaimed, but because of the dominant power within the vault, everyone would die a slow death due to radiation for everyone that did not escape initially, with more conflicts soon erupting, only now with armed and angry personnel all throughout. Unless you yourself are part of the party leaving the vault, you'll honestly be clutching your guns as you die a slow, painful death with no way out. Vault 51.
Fuck yeah, we put a battle royale in Fallout 76.
Yeah, this was just an excuse to shoehorn in a battle royale mode into Fallout 76 because everyone else was doing it at the time. These days, the mode is dead, but the lore is still there. A highly intelligent supercomputer called Zax was created in order to determine who was best fit to be Overseer of the Vault. Being an AI that manipulated everything in the vault to push all residents to their wits' end, like forcing food crises, decaffeinating coffee, setting alarms off frequently, like wide-scale alarms, not just clock alarms, rigging games that people were playing audio files of cheating couples so they liked to make them fighting more, and a lot more. Everything to apparently prove who was a leader out of all the people in the vault, playing into people's insecurities and more just to make sure they mentally snap, until everyone tries to kill each other, until it's a battle royale in the vault and only one survivor is left standing. Thus, an Overseer is dubbed. Well, if they're the last person standing, they are just really overseeing a tomb, but they win nonetheless. So if you enter Vault 51, you're going to be basically mentally tortured with waning supplies, irritating noises, lack of sleep, and distrust in others around you for countless days till you or those around you snap and everyone attempts to kill each other. Only one will survive, and if peace is attempted, Zax will continue to torture everyone until the battle royale commences or reinitiates until everyone is dead. Vault 75 embroiled itself in the idea of eugenics. Being under a school, the vault brought in teachers, parents, and students when the bombs fell. Adults and parents would be separated from their children, sent to another room, and were swiftly shot in the back of the head and executed. From then on, children would be subjected to alternative learning. They did not have their parents anymore. They were subjected to whatever Vault-Tec had in store for them, informing them of the horrors of the outside world and how they needed to be trained to prepare to venture out of the vault. But in truth, the education they received was only merely a test that merited an outcome for them once they turned 18. These children would be used for one of two purposes. The first being any students that showed smart and obedient traits would simply gain employment in the Vault's scientific team to further observe generations as they came about. Now, the children with exceptional qualities would have their organs harvested and tested on to possibly be implemented in further generations. Either that or something in their genetics mandated that their genes be harvested for genetic lab crossbreeding to create the perfect people, all for the intended purpose of creating superhuman soldiers via eugenics. Now, if you're one of those that has their organs harvested, well, you're going to be killed via lethal injection beforehand, and then subsequently have your body incinerated. If you're an adult going into this vault, you will never see your children again as you're shot in the back of the head, not knowing that they'll either also be killed for their DNA or organs, or become a part of the horrific scientific research that would continue in Vault 75. Vault 81 is a bit of a different outcome. In Fallout 4, the Overseer rejected the experimentation methods imposed by Vault-Tec, unlike most other vaults. But let's say for dark humor funsies' sake that the Overseer was paid enough to do their job. The purpose of 81 was to create a universal cure for every possible illness beset on man. An insurmountable task that would have had Vault-Tec scientists in a secret portion of the vault monitoring dwellers and administering diseases via air nozzles, spending countless hours testing cures and concoctions on them to see if the diseases were made better or worse, giving every member of the vault different diseases to work with, contagious or not. Every person would be sick with fatal or debilitating illnesses that would most likely kill off most of them in the name of science. If this research wouldn't have been sabotaged by Dr. Olivet, you would have been the definition of a test animal, having everything in the book and dying a miserable death so that doctors can desperately try to make a magical mystery cure. Vault 87 would be a rehashing of the super mutant outbreak in the West, but now in the eastern United States. The forced evolutionary virus would become a central point of study and experimentation here, where all vault dwellers were forcefully injected with the FEV and studied. Akin to other super mutants, these subjects would become super strong, dim-witted, resilient as hell, asexual in nature, and experience heightened levels of anger and anxiety. Some mutants would simply die from total brain failure, but after each subjugation, most super mutants would be executed once they started showing signs of their typical rage. But a year into these experiments did the super mutants break containment and slaughter every single person there, making the vault their home and venturing out of the vault to kidnap people to inject them with the FEV to bolster their own numbers. It was the only way they could reproduce and make more super mutants. However, being dumb meant that production of further FEV to make more super mutants was near impossible. So, for those that entered Vault 87 with the hopes of surviving, you're more than likely going to be one of the first super mutants that would be eventually euthanized for getting a little bit angry, or having your brain overloaded. Even then, as a super mutant that broke out of your containment, your consciousness will all but be completely gone, with a dumb brute now walking in your stead as you walk out into the wasteland, possibly to the many elements that you will face. Vault 92 would have you under the influence of 24/7 white noise implementing subliminal messages into its residents' heads. Only musicians were brought here to supposedly preserve music tradition and legacy, so for you musicians, this will be your fate when the bombs drop. White noise emanating from loudspeakers all over the vault did messages bore into the minds of every musician there. All headphones would be outlawed to make sure every person was subjected to this white sound. While tests would go along the science team's guidelines, the white noise would unknowingly alter the neurology of every subject, spurring extreme psychosis that gave subjects increased strength and tenacity at the cost of their coherence and rationality. One subject would go on a 3-man killing spree before being shot 23 times before he would finally succumb to his own wounds. Over time, 1/3 of the Vault's population would be converted into mindless killers, unable to control themselves, while the rest of the population struggled to survive against their onslaught, with guns and melee weapons barely deterring their rage. Things only getting worse now that nearby water sources outside the vault caused the vault to cave in random places, causing massive flooding of highly irradiated water in the chambers. The white noise would have affected everyone else, causing mental exhaustion and paranoia in those not fully changed, with everyone eventually killing each other, and those that survived would be simply trapped in the wreckage of the vault. So, you either die a musician or live long enough to become insane. So, basically the same thing. Vault 95 is Rehab if it decided to change its mind. Being a hybrid bomb shelter and rehabilitation center, all residents would be hardcore drug, Chem users, reeling from withdrawal and all of its horrible effects. All 95 dwellers inside would undergo treatment and a rehab program that would prove to be very productive for them for half a decade. No violence, no turmoil, every member becoming like family after overcoming their addictions. That is until Vault-Tec employees pull the rug out from under them and suddenly leave a giant stash of drugs open out in the middle of the vault overnight for the vault dwellers to find. With the abundance of new drugs there, most would enter extreme relapse, pouncing over each other, harming one another, and killing each other just to get all they could from what they craved for so many years. While some did resist this temptation, eventually the chaos of the drug-addled vault would lead it to being opened, only for it to be invaded by outside gunners that executed every single person inside. So, if you're a recovering alcoholic or drug addict, you can enjoy being sober for 5 years. Just have it thrown in your face with a bunch of drugs in front of you, with everyone else that was going through the same shit suddenly relapsing and everyone attacking each other, the vault opening up, and then people on the outside coming in and killing everyone there. It will be a bitter pill to swallow. Vault 106 is a non-stop bad trip. If you thought 95 and its rehab were bad, imagine if psychoactive drugs were in the very air you breathe 24/7. Now, on the 10th day after the Great War ended, Vault-Tec began pumping mind-altering chemicals through the air filtration system of Vault 106. Never having a respite of normality, and with increasing paranoia within the corridors of the vault, the 95 residents would all start to go crazy. Hallucinations would dot the sights and sounds of every person encountered. Insanity setting in most dwellers as they lash out violently at one another. You would become so drug-addled and ballistic that you'll end up killing those around you or being killed in a bloody, drug-filled rage by other people. Some residents would attempt to escape by bombing the caves near the vault, but to no avail. Everyone would eventually die with no food or water entering their systems in their blind frenzy. Although, considering by the time of Fallout 3 that the most far-gone dwellers are still alive nearly 200 years later, it's possible these drugs have some sort of, anti-aging and nourishing agent to keep the most drugged up folks alive. But if you're one of them, you could definitely say you survived, sure. But being in a permanent state of psychosis for centuries where you're not you, mindlessly and erratically walking a foggy abandoned vault with other druggies waiting for people to discover your vault to either kill or be killed isn't a life to live. Vault 111 is Futurama and Fallout 4's introduction. In the panic of the nuclear war coming to a head, all 111 recipients would descend into the vault below right as the nukes dropped, looking to make a new life underground. Vault-Tec employees would direct them to a decontamination chamber, stating that it was merely to sanitize every resident for the vault, but in reality, you and every person in these chambers would be instantly frozen. All dwellers cryogenically frozen reason to be awakened merely 6 months later to test cryogenic freezing for the Enclave's spaceships, since they were going to be traveling thousands of light years. However, the Enclave and Vault-Tec, due to certain circumstances, would never give the all-clear signal to 111 to release these people, and instead the Vault would just go into permanent lockdown because of the fear of nuclear radiation outside. The security and scientists were now in hysteria due to minuscule rations and supplies. So, a civil war inside would break out over leaving the Vault, with every single staff member dying in the skirmish, either from the battle or from not knowing how to open the Vault and eventually dying of starvation. As for you and all the other frozen popsicles around you, you are not going to be a main character. So you will be technically alive after 150 years, where you will briefly awaken to see a mercenary steal a baby, kill a parent, and then put you back into a cold sleep. Only this time around, the second time you go back into your cryogenic slumber, will you never wake back up, as sometime in the next 60 years, the life support system of the Vault will have failed due to power outages, leaving you to die cold, alone, and in a tube, with your last sight being that of a murder and your last thoughts being, is decontamination over yet? And the last vault we will be covering today is Vault 112, housing a virtual reality computer chamber orchestrated by one Dr. Stanislaus Braun, the GEC creator. Entering these pods to enter VR sounded like a perfect prospect for avoiding nuclear fallout. Your body would be well kept, well fed, and avoidant of any diseases, all while your mind would supposedly be whisked away to what would be described as your own personal utopia. However, Dr. Braun would use you and everyone else's plugged-in consciousness as playthings. The simulation within was completely controlled by the Doctor, and everyone within would be at his whim to torture, kill, and manipulate over and over and over again. Dying within his simulation could have him just resurrect you within, but upon each resurrection, all your memories would be wiped each time. If he so chooses though, you can die in real life upon death. With no means of escaping his dry slice of Americana in a black and white neighborhood forever, you could be killed in any way he imagined, like summoning an army of Chinese invaders to gun you down, or having a pint-sized slasher coming into your home and slicing you to bits. There is nothing you can do, and your memories and consciousness could be reprogrammed at will, with you being unable to defend yourself, as your new personality would be of a white bread, mayonnaise suburban neighbor detesting violence. You would not fight back in any degree. If you do not adhere to this lifestyle, you can find yourself dying over and over until this mad scientist grows bored of you and flips the life switch in your brain to off. That about wraps things up and seals up the vaults for now. There are a few vaults here and there that I omitted, like the failed make the rich live like poor people experiment of 114, the rich retaining bourgeoisie power and putting their brains into robots in 118, or the iconic isolationist approach of Vault 101. And we couldn't discuss too much of the vaults that are introduced within the TV series, as it just came out at the time and release of this video. Are there any other vaults you think I should have discussed, or do you think you could survive a majority of these enclosed death trap experiments? Let me know in the comments. Remember, leaving the vaults early means radiation death or dying to the mutants or raiders of the wasteland. Thank you to Chago for editing today's video together, and thank you for watching. Drop a like and subscribe and all that jargon. Shout out to my Patreon patrons and YouTube channel members for donating to keep the channel going. Join my Patreon to see videos up to a week early, and you can be on this list already scrolling on by. Until next time, I'm Zackass, aka Wowset Gaming. Never forget to keep whacking and macking and smacking, and keep your big iron on your hip, and don't set the world on fire. Stay happy, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay wow.